I did not sign the contract for money or medals. I signed it because I was tired of being nobody. People around me talked about duty and ideas. At home, I felt like an empty chair, and at some point something snapped. I convinced myself that out there I would finally breathe with a full chest, that the doubt would burn off. Reality met me fast and hard. You arrive, and you are nobody there. That is not a metaphor. They line you up, call you by a number, and then test how deeply you will swallow humiliation. First the snickering, then the shoves, then the punches and the filthy little stunts, all delivered without ceremony. The first time you stay silent, you give permission. After that, they can do anything. This is how people are broken quickly and quietly. No reports, no heroes, only compliance. Formation happened on bare ground, on cracked concrete slabs and half-collapsed hangars. We slept in sleeping bags, ate like dogs, and water was handed out as if it were a prize. Any attempt to ask a clear question ended with a short lesson full of curses and empty of sense. We never saw real medical care. No one explained where the nearest cover was, or who exactly signed off on evacuations. Explanations were treated as weakness. Learn to shut up and execute, or you will be taught with enthusiasm. They teach with hands and boots and cold and endless hauling of sacks back and forth until your head holds no free thoughts at all. The first trips into the gray zone knocked the air out of me. I expected animal terror, but got a blank space instead. On the left, enemy artillery, on the right, our own. Somewhere ahead, a drone, sometimes the witch hovering above. We got hit without drama, as if a bored hand was sliding pieces across a board and missing the holes. We moved in and pulled back again and again, and whatever meaning there had been bled out through repetition. There were never enough people. Vehicles were protected more than infantry. Comms flickered on and off, and always at the wrong time. I watched a line of living men turn into a list, and then the list vanish in someone else's hands. No one is responsible for the vanishing, because on paper the magic word zeroing does miracles. A fighter existed, and then somehow he did not. Files wander, signatures smudge, surnames change case, and that is the end of the question. The town we held was riddled like a sieve. Basements smelled of damp, chemicals, and something dead. We crawled between shattered walls and hugged the ground because everything fell from above. At times it felt like our own in the rear were finishing us off for discipline, so we would not relax. When we made it back, we were met with the same cold question about meters taken and why we did not take more. And nobody cared that the bodies were gone, that an evacuation failed, that only 3 people were left from the unit next door. Here they do not look at what remains. Here they ask why it is not enough. Looting was like weather. It simply existed. Someone brought back a stranger's watch, someone else a pair of sneakers from a wrecked apartment. Someone flashed a trophy phone that would be confiscated by seniors anyway. Water vanished, food vanished. Reports insisted everything was within norms. If you tried to bury a man properly, you risked a shell or a beating from your own. Often the dead lay where the front line had been yesterday, a place quiet enough today for birds to return, yet still no pickup. Closing someone's eyes was treated as luxury and weakness. Sometimes I did it anyway, quietly, so no one would notice. Humiliation was not an accident. It was a system. They could spit on you and laugh. They could hit you and ask if you understood. Once you are reduced to nobody, they can drive you anywhere. The fastest way to break a group is to gather everyone in one room and make them watch another man get broken. After that, the same mask settles on every face. Do not ask, do not plead, do not explain, do it, stay silent, disappear. Newcomers learned this pattern by day 2. Old hands pretended they were in control because the alternative ended worse for them too. In the evening, someone would turn on a cheap speaker to drown out the sound of their own head. We sat over grimy cups, stretched cold noodles, and acted as if we were living. There was no real medicine either. My leg felt like a bucket of stones, veins bulged, every step needed a curse to push it through, and the nearest doctor never seemed to exist. I was told to endure. The logistics are complicated. Everyone is busy. Tomorrow they will see you. Tomorrow did not come for weeks. When it got bad enough, they sent me to a local point, glanced without interest, scribbled compresses and injections, said that in a week I would be like new and then forward again. Take care, they said. Take care in a place where at any moment you can be erased from someone's notebook. Rehab was a tight ward with creaking frames and rare cigarettes by a window. Talk was short and bitter. Everyone tried to skate along the thin edge between being written off and being sent back. Some begged for kitchen duty, some clutched at certificates, some gambled on luck. In the 3rd week, they pushed my papers through for leave. Each office reminded me I must return on time or it would go badly. I left in one skin and came back in another, the kind that fits a living man better. At home, the silence cut my ears. The walls smelled like my old life, and my shape no longer fit it. At night came sounds that do not exist in a home. Impacts without flash, shouting with no addressee, earth springing up under your face. I moved around the room and understood that ordinary things had drifted away. A book was paper, water was liquid, a window was a rectangle. No feelings, only outlines. My people asked how I was, and I said fine. That word meant nothing, and it was easier than explaining. Leave ended fast, and almost without me. At the station, I watched people who have a tomorrow. I had today again, and I had to get out of it alive. Going back was colder than the first arrival. Corridors do not change, you do. They slotted me into another group, handed new tasks, made it clear that questions were not welcome. A new term surfaced, zeroing. It means you are a blank on paper. You were, and now you are not. When the moment comes, your case disappears, the signature blurs, and with it go rights, timelines, all promises. That makes people obedient faster than any baton. After the zeroing, you cannot get yourself back, because officially you never existed. They made this clear to me without options. Work or be nobody, and nobody is worse than dead. On the positions, everything grew rougher. We were thrown to plug yesterday's holes. No maps, only a finger pointing at a direction. Behind us, our own fired to keep pressure. On the right, the screaming arrivals. On the left, a tank stared into empty buildings and worked over our heads. It felt like we were extras in a play with cut scenes and no director at all. In the evening, inspectors arrived and asked the same question. Why did you not take more? More of what? I did not understand. More houses, more bodies, more kilometers of ruined street. No answer was needed, only submission. Somewhere along this stretch, I understood completely that there was no road back to my old expectations. Here you cannot earn respect. Here you can only stop existing. The men around me thinned out. Some disappeared into paperwork, some into rooms without witnesses, some into gray hallways where people have learned how to speak without words. We learned to keep our eyes below the boots of a senior. We learned not to memorize names so it would hurt less. We learned not to ask and not to offer. We learned to be quieter than necessary, because a loud voice here does not mean strength. It means pretext. The pain in my leg became my timekeeper. If the pain rose above the usual line, the day would go crooked. If it stayed low, I could stretch to night. Night did not save you either. At night, they shut doors, not for safety, but to remind you where you stand. I understood that if I stayed a little longer inside this logic, they would erase me without a trace. That understanding does not arrive in one dramatic flash. It seeps in like water, drop by drop, until the inside is soaked to the bone. When I felt I was soaked through, the decision came without speeches. I needed to live. That meant I needed to leave. I packed a rucksack as if for a routine outing. Documents, first aid, water, a couple of photos, socks, tiny things that could be traded. I walked the corridor at the hour when the guard's head nods and the phone music swallows the quiet. I got an automatic nod without eye contact. It was enough. Beyond the gate, it was dark and still. The wind moved through leaves and did not sort people into right and wrong. I took 10 steps, then 10 more. Each step pulled me back into myself. There were no guarantees ahead. There was one goal: stay alive until morning and avoid their net. Morning had to come not because someone ordered it, but because I would walk to it myself. The first hour after the gate was a tunnel of dark trees and dirt that sucked at my boots. I kept the road on my left and moved along the black strip of shrubs where no headlights could paint me. Every sound felt like a hand on my shoulder. A distant truck, a dog, a loose sheet of tin scraping somewhere up ahead. I counted steps in groups of 50 and forced myself to pause, listen, and breathe into the sleeve so the breath would not steam. My leg throbbed like a bad drum, but the beat meant I was still moving. By dawn, I reached the edge of a settlement. Same gray houses, same satellite dishes, same patched asphalt. I wiped dust off my face and practiced the only story that might carry me through. I was headed to a warehouse. I was on an errand my commander knew. Names make doors open, so I used the most common names I could remember and kept my eyes low. At the first corner, I saw a patrol. 2 bored faces and a third one that was not bored at all. I did not change pace. I nodded the way everyone nods when they see authority and kept going. They let me pass. 10 meters later, my knees almost gave out from the simple relief of not hearing, "Hey you." The calls started that afternoon. Unknown numbers, heavy breathing, a flat voice asking where I thought I was going. I powered off the phone and removed the SIM. Then the phone felt like a nail in my pocket, and I ditched it in a trash bin under a pile of cabbage leaves. Fear climbed higher in my chest after that, because without a phone you have no clock and no map and no way to call for mercy. You have only your pace and the pattern of shadows across the street. I learned to move like a stain. Short bursts between doorways, long pauses in stairwells that smelled of old soup and wet concrete. I waited until someone opened an entrance and slipped in behind them, as if I belonged to that address. In one stairwell, an old woman looked at me for a long second. She did not ask anything. She simply turned her head toward the mailboxes, and I understood the hint. I crouched there until the stairwell emptied and the day thinned into evening. On the second night, I found a contact of a contact. A man with oil under his nails who fixed things that were not listed on any price sheet. He looked at my leg, shook his head once, and pushed a chipped mug of tea into my hands. No questions. For a few hours, I slept in a storage room on a pile of fabric rolls. When I woke, the man pointed at a duffel bag and a cap with a corporate logo. "Wear this and keep your mouth short," he said without words. I left before dawn. I left a packet of painkillers under his ashtray because cash would have been an insult. Checkpoints were the worst hours. Each one was a small stage play with the same scene. A rope of cars, a couple of rifles, a desk scavenged from a school, a thermos, and a bored ledger. They wanted paperwork and reasons and the right tone. I served them a blend of fatigue and irritation, the way a courier does who is late and underpaid. I learned which verbs sounded like I had done this before and which nouns made them check their phone instead of checking me. Sometimes it worked because the world is lazy. Sometimes it worked because my hands did not shake. Rumors followed like cold smoke. A guy in our sector was taken and vacuum sealed. That was the phrase. Like meat with all the air sucked out. Another one tried to hide in a church and left with ribs purple as plums. The word zeroing appeared again and again in stairwell whispers and at back doors. You are nobody if they decide to write it that way. Nobody gets no lawyer and no appeal and no mother at the fence asking the right questions. The math is simple. No name, no problem. On the fourth day, I saw my own face on a sheet of paper taped to a glass booth at a bus station. The photo was old, the haircut wrong, but the eyes were mine. Wanted for desertion, report sightings to the number below, do not approach. My stomach turned over and then settled into a heavy quiet. The man in the booth watched me look at the sheet and then watched me buy a ticket to a nearby town. He tore the ticket with slow fingers and did not blink. I sat in the last row and kept my hands in my pockets so no one would see the tremor. The bus was a moving confession booth. People muttered into their phones, scrolled, slept with mouths open, stared out at fields shattered by tracks. A boy in the seat ahead peeked over the headrest. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine a morning with no orders. It felt like a fairy tale for adults who should have known better. At the next stop, two men in civilian jackets got on and walked the aisle without looking at anyone in particular. I slid off at the following stop and walked away before the bus doors had closed. I ate in grocery stores where cashiers did not care about faces. Yogurt in the corner, bread rolled into a tight wad, water from the shelf closest to the door. At night, I slept in places that smelled of dust and mice. One night in a half-built garage, one night under a staircase behind a piece of plywood, one night in a laundry room where the machines boomed like distant artillery and let me sleep anyway. Pain traveled from the leg into the lower back and set up a winter camp there. I avoided anyone in uniform, but uniforms are not what they used to be. Some units wore black and moved as if the air belonged to them. They checked phones, pockets, tattoos, knees. In an alley, I saw two of them working over a boy against a brick wall. They did not shout. Shouting is theatrical. They used the quiet tone of men who do not need to explain themselves. The boy slid down the wall like a rag is pulled off a nail. I kept walking. The lesson was written right there in daylight. You do not watch. You do not testify. You do not exist. Contacts failed, and new ones appeared. A woman behind a pharmacy counter folded a paper with an address under a bandage box. A taxi driver with a gold tooth said the fuel surcharge would be high, and then turned off his dash cam without comment. A janitor on a night shift let me into a service corridor and handed me a reflective vest that made me invisible. I paid when they would let me. I owed when they would not. Debts like that travel with you whether you leave the country or not. The closer I got to a real border, the thicker the net became. More questions, more lists, more eyes that had been trained to weigh stories by the angle of a chin. I built a legend around a workplace injury. The limp helped. Papers with stamps helped more. Stamps are the religion of this land, and the priest is whoever holds the pad. I spent a full day in a room without windows, while a man with a shaved head asked me the same 6 questions in different orders. He wanted to see anger or fear or pride. I gave him boredom and a slow pulse. In the end, he waved me through like a carton in a warehouse. At a safe flat near a rail yard, I met others who had walked my road. A cook with a busted wrist who laughed at night and cried in his sleep. A quiet teacher whose son was on a missing list already 3 months long. A mechanic who had been zeroed twice and still had the paper to prove he existed once. We sat on the floor because there were not enough chairs. We ate from one pot and kept the lights off. Nobody told stories because stories turn back into hands and boots and blind corners. We shared silence instead, and it felt like medicine. I kept moving. A freight platform at dawn, a service bus at noon, a truck bed under a tarp at dusk. Every driver had a different price and a different reason to help. Some hated the war and said it plainly. Some hated the institution and said it quietly. Some just loved cash and did not care either way. I did not judge them. I no longer had any clean words left for judging. On the last night before the crossing, the wind changed and carried the smell of wet earth and diesel and something like freedom. Freedom has no taste. It is the absence of a taste you have been forced to swallow. I lay on my back in grass that stuck to my neck and counted stars until the counting calmed me. If they grabbed me now, it would all be for nothing, and yet not quite for nothing, because even this run had shown me a simple truth. A system can make you small, but it cannot make your feet stop unless you let it. We went at 3 in the morning. 2 shadows and me, pressed flat against a ditch line. Then a crawl under a cut fence. Then a dash across a bare patch where every step felt like a flare. A flare did not rise. A shout did not come. We slid into a new dark shaped differently from the old one. On the other side, a man in a parka counted us silently and jerked his chin toward a van. The door closed and the engine turned over. I did not speak. I pressed my palm to my leg and felt the old drum slow to a softer beat. Morning was still far, but for the first time in months I believed I would live long enough to see it. The van smelled like canvas, diesel, and damp wool. We sat 3 across on a plank bench, knees pressed to knees, staring at the rivets in the floor as if they were coordinates. Nobody asked names. Names are liabilities that leak under pressure. The man in the parka rode up front and spoke to the driver in short syllables that sounded like the clicking of a switch. The road unspooled through industrial zones and empty fields, then through a grid of side streets where the houses all had 2 windows and a satellite dish. Every time we slowed, my heart shoved at my ribs, then eased when the van picked up again. At the second stop, we changed vehicles. The new one was smaller, windows taped with a strip of brown paper along the edges to block recognition. A woman in a heavy coat climbed in with a grocery bag and sat across from me. She never looked up. Inside her bag, I saw bread, a bottle of oil, a packet of batteries. Civilian cargo, the safest kind of camouflage. When we started moving, she reached into her bag and placed a cold bottle of water on the bench between us. I nodded once. She did not nod back. That was fine. Grace does not always need witnesses. We reached a town that pretended to be asleep. Streetlights were on timers, and the timers had given up years ago. The driver killed his headlights a block early and coasted into a courtyard, where a spray of gravel announced us anyway. A door opened upstairs. A triangular spill of yellow fell over a stairwell, and then withdrew like a cautious animal. Inside the flat, the wallpaper was the color of boiled cabbage, and the air held the smell of cleaning fluid, strong enough to bite the tongue. We were told to sit, told to wait, told nothing else. The man in the parka counted us again with his eyes and left. Waiting is its own kind of patrol. You sweep your memory for loose ends. You measure the room for trapdoors that are not there. You take inventory of your body and mark the parts beginning to fail. My leg hummed like a low wire in the rain. I lay on the floor and propped my heel on the wall to drain the ache. The woman with the bag ate a heel of bread slowly, as if time could be stretched by chewing. In the next room, someone whispered into a phone and used a soft, deliberate tone reserved for talking to a baby or to armed men who have not yet decided what to do with you. By mid-afternoon, a thin man with a square of gauze taped to his cheek came through the door with a sheaf of papers. He placed them on the table, then on second thought tucked them under his arm and told us we were moving. Down the stairs, single file, pause at the landing where the light sensor failed, listen to traffic, out. We did not bunch up. We did not drift. In the alley, a boy on a scooter cruised past and gave us no more attention than he gave a pile of bricks. That too felt like protection. The next checkpoint was the kind that wears a friendly face. A modular hut with posters about safety, a traffic cone, a soldier smoking behind the corner where he thought the camera could not see him. They waved us through. 10 meters later, the friendly face sent a text, and 3 corners after that, a different team flagged us down with a lazy paddle of the hand. You learn to spot the choreography. The first wave smiles, so the second can ask the real questions. The thin man with the gauze gave them a bundle of laminated cards, and a joke so old it was new again. They laughed at the shape of it. One of them tapped the van roof twice with his ring. Go. We slept that night in a brick garage where the floor held the ghost of oil spills in the shape of continents. The thin man told us we would split at dawn and take overlapping paths. Redundancy is how you keep failure local. He drew a map with a blunt pencil on cardboard, marking 3 markets, 5 underpasses, 1 bus station, 2 public toilets. You will not use all of them, he said without saying it. You will use whichever the day gives you. I studied the lines the way I once studied battle maps, except these lines did not promise victory, only a longer piece of time. At dawn, the woman in the coat was gone. I did not hear her leave. Maybe she left in the hushed hour when the neighborhood breathes deepest. I ate a dry biscuit that pebbled in my mouth and washed it down with water that tasted like metal. Then I walked. Factory belt, service road, footbridge, 2 blocks of kiosks selling phone cases and slippers. A police car crawled past, slow as a hunting beetle. I looked at a display of plastic basins as if I needed to compare colors, letting the car complete its loop. When it was gone, the stall owner asked whether I needed help. I said I was waiting for my wife. He called me lucky, not because of a wife, but because I still had the option of waiting. By noon, I had another set of papers. They were not perfect. The stamp ink had bled on one edge and the signature sat a little too far to the right. Imperfections can be virtue. Documents that look machine-made attract a machine response. These looked like they had touched human hands, and that is often enough. I built my face into the face on the papers by practicing the same neutral boredom. Boredom is the safest emotion. It convinces the world you belong to it. The hardest door was an office with a glass front and chairs chained together in a row. Inside sat a man the color of overbrewed tea. He leafed through my papers and asked for missing ones, the ones he knew I did not have. Every system reserves the right to request the impossible. I told him those sheets were with the visiting commission. He asked which commission. I named one that had visited earlier in the month. He said they had not visited here. I said, of course, which is why the papers were delayed. For a short second, our eyes met like two blades tapping. Then he stamped one sheet and signed another and told me not to lose them in transit. We both accepted the fiction we had made together. Travel becomes a diet of repetitions. Ticket, platform, aisle seat, doze, wake with a jerk when the bus hisses to a stop, repeat. I learned the sound of my name when spoken by strangers who did not know me. The slight lift at the end of a sentence that asks for compliance without saying the word, please. In a roadside canteen, I ate soup that tasted of dill and dishwater and felt grateful anyway. The woman at the counter saw the limp and gave me extra bread. Charity appears most often where rules are strict but not fully policed. It leaks through the seams. That evening, the thin man returned like a memory and told me I would go the last segment alone. He gave me 3 instructions. Do not look at cameras as if you recognize them. Do not change pace when you see uniforms. Do not say sorry, say thank you, because thank you implies you have a right to be there. He squeezed my shoulder once, not a hug, only calibration. Then he turned away before the gesture could be mistaken for affection. Affection complicates decisions at the edge. The crossing itself was a corridor built of air and timing. I entered as a worker leaving a shift, fluorescent vest over a dark sweater, a cheap lunchbox in one hand. My papers said delivery, and the vest said ignore me. 2 guards argued about a football match with the bright scorn of men who have not bled lately. A 3rd guard watched the argument and did not watch me. I moved through the argument and became part of the scenery. A scanner beeped, because scanners always beep. A sleepy clerk waved in the universal language of later. I chose a line behind a woman with a stroller. Babies rearrange attention in useful ways. On the far side, a volunteer with a clipboard asked whether I needed medical aid. The question hit me sideways. For a beat, my body wanted to say yes to everything. A bed, a bath, a quiet room with a door that locks from the inside. I said I needed a place to sit. They showed me a tent with folding chairs and a barrel heater that smelled like scorched dust. I sat until the heater made my shins itch and then stood because sitting felt too much like stopping. Stopping still terrified me more than running. There were other men there with the same thin look. One showed me a photo of his dog and told me the dog was with his sister now. Another had a bruise like a drowned moon around one eye. He said he fell. We all said we fell. A volunteer poured tea from a thermos and asked where we came from. We answered with the names of weather fronts. East, south of there, near the smoke, the place that used to have a school. She did not push. People who have carried enough weight know not to add questions on top of it. By dusk, I had a bed in a church basement that did not smell of cabbage or bleach. Someone's grandmother had knitted blankets that were too colorful to be sad. I lay under one and listened to pipes click, to footsteps, to the soft cough of the man on the next cot. My leg pulsed, and then softened into a lazy ache. Sleep came in fragments. I woke once with my hands clenched, and had to pry my fingers open one by one, as if they belonged to a stubborn stranger. When I finally slept through an hour, I dreamed of a field with no footprints. In the dream, I did not hurry. That was the miracle, not the field. The next days were administrative weather. A queue, a number, a window, a new number, a different window, a photocopy that came out too light, a request to resubmit. Systems everywhere share a dialect of delay, I tried not to take the bait. Anger is a hook, and hooks are for catching fish. Instead, I stood, stepped, returned, repeated. The volunteer with the clipboard showed me which office prefers early mornings and which one answers best before lunch. The map of these habits is a survival map, too. One afternoon, a question hit me harder than a checkpoint ever had. A woman from a small organization asked if I wanted to give testimony. She promised privacy, blurred faces, legal language, a file that would be stored, not forgotten. My mouth said later. My head said never. I watched my own refusal like a bird watches itself in a window. It was not fear of punishment. It was fear of becoming a story told in past tense. I had survived by being unremarkable. Testimony requires marks. I took a day to walk a river I did not know. A path cut through reeds and the air smelled like cold water and algae and distant smoke. On a sandbar, someone had built a cairn of small stones, the kind of stack you make when you want to see evidence of order. I added one. It tilted and then found balance. A child shouted to his father in a language I did not speak, and the father answered without turning. That ordinary sound slid into me like medicine. Not the kind that kills pain, the kind that reminds you pain is not the only sensation left. In the evening, I bought a cheap notebook and wrote 3 lines. I am here. I am not property. I will not go back. The lines looked childish on the page, and maybe that was the right scale for truth. Big statements had gotten me in trouble. Small ones might carry me to tomorrow. I tore the page out and folded it into my pocket. Paper is heavier than it looks when it is the first thing you have owned in months that a uniform cannot confiscate with a glance. I started planning the next border, the one in my head. Getting out is only half. Remaining out is the other half, and it requires a different set of muscles. You have to rebuild the habit of speaking without checking who is in the doorway. You have to relearn that a knock at night can mean a neighbor with a wrong key. You have to accept that no one will tell you when to sleep or when to eat, and that freedom is a schedule you invent and keep yourself. These are not glamorous victories. They are the sort that accumulate quietly until you notice you did not flinch when a car backfired. One morning I woke before the heater clicked and realized the drum in my leg had fallen to a murmur. I flexed my foot, and the pain did not lunge. The world did not become kind because of that. It became slightly less hostile, which is a shape of kindness I trust more. I dressed, drank bitter tea, and stepped outside into a day that was simply a day. No siren, no inspection, no parade of men with lists. I stood there longer than made sense, letting the ordinary settle on my shoulders. Then I walked, not away from something, not toward anything grand, just forward, because forward was mine again. Paperwork is a slow war fought with pens and plastic chairs. I learned the positions quickly. The office that stamps, the office that registers, the office that pretends not to exist after 3 in the afternoon. I wore the same neutral face to all of them and practiced sentences that used verbs without adjectives. Adjectives invite arguments. Verbs move you from one window to the next. When they asked for proof of address, I pointed to the church basement and said temporary. When they asked for next of kin, I wrote a name that was true once and left the phone number blank, then crossed out the blank and wrote unavailable in block letters. Blocks are sturdy even when the rest of you shakes. A clinic scanned my leg with a machine that hummed like a distant transformer. The technician did not say much. He printed a sheet and circled 2 shadows with a pen. Scar tissue, inflammation, nothing exotic, just a body that had been made to do too much for too long. He gave me a list of exercises and a bottle with tablets that tasted like old coins. "Take them with food," he said without looking at me. He had seen too many men with the same leg and the same look. Familiarity is its own form of mercy. He did not ask why, and I did not offer stories that would sit between us like a wet coat. I called home from a borrowed phone in a corridor that smelled of stale heat. The first call did not connect. The second did, and a voice I had known my whole life said hello in a way that made me lean against the wall. I said I was alive. The voice did not cry or shout. It breathed once and said good. We kept it short because short is safer. Lines can be touched, even if you cannot see the finger that touches them. When I ended the call, my hand shook hard enough to blur the number on the display. I pressed the phone to my chest until the shaking passed. Then I deleted the call from the history and wiped the screen as if sweat could leave fingerprints on a signal. Nights were quieter in the basement than in any barracks. Quiet has its own stages. First you flinch at every footstep and door latch. Then you learn the building's rhythms and flinch only at the ones that do not fit. Finally you realize the worst noise left is inside your head. I lay awake listening to the small sounds humans make when they feel safe enough to sleep. The sigh before turning. The long exhale that ends in a soft snore. The rustle of a blanket. Those sounds were like stitches pulling two edges of fabric together. The seam held. I slept. A volunteer drove me to a place that was not called a shelter because words matter. It was a community center in daylight and a place to disappear at night. A bulletin board offered language classes, odd jobs, legal clinics. I signed my name for 2 of those and printed the letters slowly to remember what writing feels like when it is not an interrogation. The language teacher was a man with chalk on his sleeves who once taught literature and now taught verbs that let refugees buy bread and ask for receipts. He made us practice please and thank you and the small sentence I am learning. Adults look foolish when they repeat syllables, but that foolishness is clean compared to the foolishness of pretending you do not need help. Work came as a patchwork. A warehouse that needed boxes moved. A kitchen that needed potatoes peeled. A crew that needed a pair of hands to hang drywall in a school that had finally replaced broken windows. On the second day at the school, the sound of the drill turned my stomach because it was too close to a sound I knew too well. I put the drill down, breathed through my teeth, and drank water until the tremor in my hands retreated to a small local storm. No one asked why. The foreman carried a past of his own and recognized the look a man gets when a sound hooks behind his ribs. I kept my head low, but not bowed. Low means invisible. Bowed means beaten. There is a difference, and your spine knows it before your mind does. On a tram, a man in a uniform stared too long at my shoes, and I stared at the advertisement above his head until my eyes watered. The ad promised a payday loan with a smiling cartoon wallet. The cartoon felt obscene but also honest. Everything here has a price. Even relief demands its coins. The question of testimony kept knocking. Not from law or press yet, from inside. I had run on silence and disguise. Silence and disguise had saved me. But silence is also a kind of debt, and debts accrue interest. I started writing in the cheap notebook, because paper listens without flinching. I set rules. No purple words, no glory, no invented heroics. Only facts in the order they happened, and the thoughts that came with them. When sentences drifted toward metaphor, I cut them back to the bone. A clean sentence is a form of respect for the dead and for the living who might still get out. In the market, I saw a boy wearing a hoodie with a slogan about victory. He kicked a bottle cap along the curb and laughed in the clear way children laugh. The sound felt like it came from a previous century. I did not dislike the boy. He was wearing the only language his street gave him. Still, I wanted to stop him and say that victory is an adult word that gets children killed. I did not stop him. He ran after the bottle cap and turned the corner and was gone. The desire stayed, and behind it, a new rule formed. When I speak, I will aim words at ears that can use them, not at ears that might only echo them. Money thinned. It always does. I learned which stalls sold bruised fruit cheap at closing. I learned the shape of hunger that is just enough to keep you sharp without making you reckless. Reckless is expensive. Sharp is priceless. On Sundays, the church basement filled with murmurs and the smell of boiled wheat. A woman with flour on her hands gave me a bag with bread and said there was no need to repay. But if I wanted, I could carry chairs after the service. I carried chairs. Labor is cleaner than pity. Pity is a slow poison that eats the muscle that keeps you standing. The leg improved by inches. I measured progress by stairs, climbed without stopping, and by the mornings when I did not negotiate with pain before putting weight on the foot. I walked routes that avoided alleys with cameras and streets where patrols liked to lean on their cars. I learned that safety is not a location, but a pattern you repeat until it becomes expectation. Then you change the pattern because expectation invites predators. The world is full of men who can smell a routine. News seeped in from people like me, men who had slipped the net by wit or luck or both. A barber who had shaved heads on both sides of the line and decided he would only shave schoolboys and retirees from now on. A welder who fixed gates and swallowed his rage one mouthful at a time until someone mistook him for harmless, and in that mistake he found his opening. A medic who traded her uniform for a cashier's apron and knew that the numbers she tapped on a register were not small at all. They were tallies of days not bled out on a floor. We gathered their details without making them into legends. Legends are just a different kind of chain. One evening, a man with a camera asked if I would speak without my face. He had the delicate hands of someone who adjusts focus by feel. He promised to blur, to distort, to flatten my voice into a monotone that would not be recognized by anyone who had barked orders at me. He said people needed to hear. I believed him and still said no. Not yet. Not because I was afraid of their punishment, but because I was not ready to carry the attention of strangers. Attention is a heat source. It warms and it burns. You need the right skin for it. I practiced a different form of speech instead. Quiet conversations with men at tables where no one took photos. I told them the parts that matter. How humiliation is not a glitch, but the operating system. How zeroing is not paperwork, but a weapon that erases people twice. How looting is not an anecdote, but a climate you breathe. And once you breathe it long enough, you forget the first taste of clean air. I told them that the bravest act I saw was not a charge or a shot. It was a man closing the eyes of another man when doing so might have cost him a broken jaw. I told them the sentence that will be the spine of my story if I ever tell it in public. It is hell, do not go there. The question about responsibility arrived as a letter in my head with no return address. What do you owe the ones who never got to leave? What do you owe the ones still trapped inside the machine that grinds? I could not answer with a speech. I answered with small vows I could keep. I would not glamorize. I would not sanitize. I would not let my own survival become an advertisement for luck. I would not tell young men that pain is a path to meaning. Pain is only pain unless you refuse to pass it on. Winter edged in. The air got clean in the cruel way cold air gets clean. I bought a second-hand coat that smelled of someone else's tobacco and cut the smell with vinegar and sun. The center moved us from the basement to a dorm with thin walls and a view of nothing important. The radiator clicked, the window leaked, the bed squeaked, and I slept anyway. Sleep gathers itself like a stray cat. If you leave a bowl out long enough, it will come. I started to feel my old life knocking from the inside of a trunk. Not the nonsense dreams about medals and parades, the real life, the one with breakfasts and broken zippers and the pleasure of mending something small. I fixed a toaster for the woman with the flour on her hands. I oiled a door hinge in the corridor so it stopped announcing every entrance. I replaced a light bulb no one else could reach. These were tiny rescues, and I let them count. A man from the center said there might be a way to make my status official. Official is a dangerous word, but it can build a floor under your feet. It would mean statements and signatures, and maybe a room with a camera later. It would also mean that I exist on paper in a place that will not erase me to make the numbers look neat. I told him I would think. He nodded as if I had already said yes. Maybe I had. Maybe that is what thinking means now. Measuring the size of the next risk and deciding whether the ground under it is solid enough to take the jump. I walked back to the dorm under a sky the color of old zinc and felt the familiar calculation start in my chest. Risk against time. Time against truth. Truth against the fact that I want to live more than I want to be right. I have learned not to despise that instinct. A man who wants to live can still tell the truth. He just has to pick a time when the truth does not drag him back into the mouth he escaped. In the room, I opened the cheap notebook and wrote one more line. If I speak, I will speak for those who cannot. Then I closed the notebook and put it under the mattress, not because I thought someone would search the place tonight, but because hiding the words where I sleep makes them feel closer to the body that has to carry them. I turned off the light and listened to the radiator click and to the soft human noises on the other side of the wall. Sleep came without asking this time. I let it take me. Tomorrow could bring a door with a camera or another day of peeling potatoes. Both are survivable. Both are life. Official meant a door with a camera and a table that had seen too many elbows. I sat, placed my palms flat, and watched the red light wake. The woman across from me read my name from a sheet and asked me to confirm. I confirmed. She asked if I wanted water. I said yes, because yes is a human word. She said the recording had started and that I could stop at any point. Stopping is a freedom you forget is yours. I let the idea sit in the room with us like a fourth chair. I spoke the way I wrote in the notebook. Short, clean lines. Time, place, action. Names only where they were already public or dead. I described the system, not the gossip. How humiliation is the default setting. How zeroing is the trick that turns men into vapor so no one has to answer questions. How looting is not a side effect, but part of the atmosphere. Like smoke in a room with no windows. I kept my voice low and steady because fury makes words look smaller. And I needed the words to stand on their own legs. They asked for details I had not wanted to keep. I gave the ones that matter. A door that locked from the outside. A corridor with a stain that never went away. A man who closed another man's eyes when doing so could have cost him teeth. I did not perform. I did not plead. I did not dress pain up in costumes. The camera blinked the same way at the start and at the end. Machines do not grade testimony. People do. When we were done, the woman slid a form across the table. She explained what could happen next. Some of it was protection. Some of it was paper that would follow me and make doors open with less noise. Some of it was simply a record so that if someone tried to erase me again, there would be more than one copy of me in the world. I signed where she pointed. My hand did not shake. After months of holding my breath, I finally exhaled, and the room suddenly smelled like cheap coffee and printer ink and new dust. The smell of small offices where people try to keep the walls from closing in. With status comes a quieter kind of fear. Not the kind that makes you duck in doorways. The kind that asks if you can hold your own past without letting it run you. I tested that in small ways. I took a bus across town without rehearsing a legend in my head. I walked through a market and let a vendor talk me into buying apples I did not need. I sat on a bench in a park where a fountain pretended to be a river and let the sound do its useless little job. Ordinary life is not a cure. It is a brace that keeps your steps aligned while the broken parts knit. Work got steadier. A warehouse liked the way I stack. A repair shop liked the way I listen to a machine before putting a tool on it. I learned to invoice and to keep receipts and to put a little aside each week. Money is not happiness. It is choices. Choices are oxygen. I gave the center a quiet envelope for the pantry that filled on Sundays. They did not make a speech. They said thank you and put it in a tin with rubber bands around it. Dignity lives in small containers. The notebook grew fat. I wrote at night with the window cracked even in cold weather because I wanted to hear the city breathe. I crossed out lines that sounded like speeches. I kept the lines that sounded like a man talking to one person across a table. I did not plan a book. I planned a record that would be there when some boy a year from now typed the wrong words into a search bar and found the right ones instead. If even one boy reads that it is hell and does not go, that is a ledger entry I can live with. I called home again, this time from a borrowed phone in a different corridor. I said I was stable. The voice said that stable is a good word. We touched the topics that are safe to touch and left the others for a later that may never come. I did not ask for forgiveness, and none was offered. Forgiveness is not a product you can order by number. What I wanted was simpler. To be known as alive and as trying. That is enough for now. Winter hardened and then began to loosen its grip. The dorm moved from radiators that clicked to windows that leaked sun. I picked up the habit of walking at dawn before the city made its own weather. Empty streets taught me the shape of my new fear and how to keep it small. I practiced not flinching at sudden noises. I practiced not scanning every rooftop. Progress registered in the seconds it took for my heart to return to normal. A day came when I did not count those seconds. That was progress too. The center asked if I would speak to a small room, not cameras, just people who wanted to understand. I agreed. 10 chairs, a kettle, a box of tissues no one touched. I told them what I could carry without shaking. I told them not to make me or anyone like me into a symbol. Symbols are heavy. People are already carrying enough. I told them to watch the men in their cities who romanticize violence and to answer with better stories and with work that feeds rather than devours. They listened. Some wrote notes. When it was over, a young man waited until the room emptied and said he had been thinking of signing a contract. He asked what I thought. I said the only sentence that has never failed me. It is hell, do not go there. He nodded once. Not as a promise to me, as a promise to himself. That was his to keep. There were setbacks. A night of bad dreams that left me sour for 2 days. A checkpoint on a city edge where a bored officer decided to flex his job like a muscle, and I had to let him burn out without giving him a reason to escalate. A phone call from a number I did not recognize that said my name in a way that tried to make the walls close in again. I hung up and walked to a street with more eyes on it. Fear obeys physics. Give it space, and it thins. I fixed more small things. A desk drawer that stuck, a squealing belt on a washing machine, a child's toy with a wheel that would not turn. You start to believe you deserve a life when you contribute to the unremarkable. Remarkable moments carry you forward by inches. Unremarkable ones build the ground you walk on. When spring finally showed itself, I took the notebook to the river and read the first pages. The man in those lines sounded like someone wading through syrup, heavy and slow and angry at the thickness. The man on the bench had the same bones but different breath. I did not love either version more. Both had done what they could with the air they had. I added one more page. A plain account of leaving, of crossing, of finding a place that did not ask me to be a weapon or a ghost. The camera room called me back once more to sign a statement confirming that I had reviewed my words and that they were mine. I signed. The woman asked if I wanted to add anything. I told her there was one more line I had not found a place for. She waited. I said that survival is not a medal. It is a task list. Eat, sleep, work. Tell the truth when you can. Refuse to pass along pain you did not choose. Help the next one through the gate. She wrote it down without decoration. I will not pretend the story ends in triumph. It ends in a room with a working lock and a morning that arrives because I set an alarm and because my heart still beats. It ends in a city where I know which tram to take and which street to avoid and where the apples are cheaper after 4. It ends with my leg humming less each week and my hands steady enough to thread a screw. It ends with a simple vow I can keep. I am here. I am not property. I will not go back.